Hi, my name is Ellie Levins. I am a graduate student at Oklahoma State University, and I have been working with Dr. Ted Wagner during the Summer Scholars Program this year. I also started in his lab a year ago, actually during the Summer Scholars Program last year. So I will be talking today a little bit about just what I've been doing with Summer Scholars broadly, as well as the specific studies I've been running on hookah and external factors related to hookah use. And then I will share some implications of our research as well as some future directions. So first, during the Summer Scholars Program this year, I have worked on a few projects not related to hookah, but that I'd like to share a little bit about. The first is a vape shop interview study where it's part of a pilot grant from a P50 at Georgia State University. So they're essentially looking at 7 U.S. cities and marketing and point of sale at vape shops. And this was done through qualitative interviews with owners and managers. They also assessed the opinions of proposed regulations and policies related to electronic cigarette use. My role in this was to be the Oklahoma City kind of correspondent. And so I conducted some 5 interviews with vape shop owners. And that is an ongoing project which we'll continue to work with the folks at Georgia State University in order to complete that, hopefully within the next few months here. I also worked on a number of grant submissions over the summer to fund some hookah research that I'm interested in continuing. The first was an APF COGDOP application. That is an application where in the psychology department at OSU, one application is submitted to the national submission for COGDOP, and the grant submission that I worked on with Dr. Wagner was selected by the OSU psychology department in order to be submitted for that. So we should hear about that in, I think, a month or so. We also submitted an Elsie Ramos Memorial Student Research Award to ABCT, and have not heard about that either. And we are starting an F31 application looking at the impact of concurrent hookah and alcohol use. And so we will submit that come December. I'd like to talk a little bit about hookah now specifically, and starting with an overview of hookah and how it works. So first, the anatomy of a hookah. So hookah smoking involves essentially drawing air through the top of the hookah. It passes over coals that are placed on top of the hookah tobacco, which is referred to as shisha. The air then passes down the body of the hookah and is eventually pulled through water, and then it bubbles up and is pulled through the hose and then inhaled by the user. So some basic information about hookah. So hookah use is increasing among all populations throughout the U.S., but specifically among young adults. So first, among adults, we have seen an increase in use. Current use estimates are around 1.5%, again for adults, and ever use is at about 9.8%, versus young adult use, which is very much driving this increase in use of hookah. Current use rates have been on the rise from 2011 to 2014 from 4.1% to 9.4%. And there are many negative health outcomes related to hookah use, partially because of the large amount of smoke that's taken in during a hookah session. Hookah sessions are typically about 60 minutes long, and a hookah user will inhale about 60 to 90,000 milliliters of smoke, versus, so we can compare that to one cigarette in which a user is taking in 500 to 600 milliliters of smoke. So it's a huge amount of smoke that's being taken in, which is why this is such a concern, one argument is, well, people don't use hookah as often as they use cigarettes. And many researchers, myself included, would argue, well, this is still problematic due to the enormous amount of smoke that they take in during these sessions, whether they be once a week or once every other day. Hookah users are also exposed to the same toxins that are present in cigarette smoke, but they're often exposed at higher levels, again, due to the large amount of smoke. There are heavy metals, benzene, tar, carbon monoxide, and nicotine all present in hookah smoke that are also found in cigarette smoke. As such, hookah is associated with the same negative health outcomes as cigarette use, such as lung cancer, lung disease, respiratory illness, and cardiovascular disease. And so one thing that we're interested in is the role of flavors in hookah. And we essentially just don't know very much about how flavors impact the way that people smoke hookah. What we do know is pulled from the cigarette literature. And what we know about cigarettes is that smokers rate flavors as a hugely important component of their continued use of cigarettes, and that smokers rate flavored tobacco as much more satisfying than unflavored tobacco. And that flavors also make it easier to smoke tobacco, and therefore this increases the rates of initiation and nicotine dependence among users. And flavored tobacco appeals to naive and younger smokers, and it may be responsible for greater initiation and in young adults and naive users. There's also been, so due to these findings about flavors in cigarettes and other tobacco, there's been legislation. So flavors other than menthol, as we all know, are banned under the Tobacco Control Act. However, this does not apply to hookah. There's a little bit of research about flavors in hookah, essentially all self-report. But among young adult hookah smokers, 59% report use of flavored tobacco. And this is more than any other tobacco product in terms of the rates of flavored tobacco use. However, there's no research directly exploring the role of flavors in smoking patterns, smoking initiation, or maintenance among hookah smokers. And like I said before, the Tobacco Control Act does not cover hookah, and therefore flavors are not regulated like cigarettes. So it's essentially an unfettered market where hookah can be used in kind of any manner and with any flavors. So the purpose of our study is to evaluate the impact of flavored shisha on smoking patterns, specifically smoking topography, which I'll talk more about, the toxicity, addiction potential, and continued use of flavored products. And on the bottom of the screen, you can see just some examples of some of the flavors that are available. You can see how these may be particularly of interest to naive or younger users. So for our design, we are conducting an in-lab randomized crossover trial. We are interested in users who are using hookah fairly often. So we are aiming to recruit individuals who are using hookah monthly and who, of course, are not pregnant, don't have any pre-existing conditions. We are shooting for an N of 30. So since it's a randomized trial, that will mean that we will have 60 sessions. So everyone will come in for 2 sessions. And their smoking schedule for these sessions are, in the first session, they will smoke flavored and unflavored. And then in the next session that they come in, they would smoke unflavored and flavored. However, it's a randomized trial, so this smoking schedule is flipped for half of participants. So half get flavored shisha first, half get unflavored shisha first. They smoke for 45 minutes, and we tell them to essentially just do what you would normally do. And they smoke in a little smoking tent that we've set up in one of Dr. Floyd's labs. There is a 48-hour washout period between their smoking sessions, as well as a 12-hour abstinence before both sessions. And so here you can see the design of this study. So pre-smoking, we have them come in and they conduct a lung functioning test as well as a CO test. We measure their blood nicotine levels before smoking, and they complete a baseline survey as well as a pre-session survey. So our baseline survey is going to consist of demographics, their typical use, things like that. And then just before they start smoking, we measure their withdrawal symptoms and their urge to smoke and things like that. They then have their smoking session where they're smoking either the flavored or the unflavored shisha. And during that, we measure their smoking topography. And again, I'll talk about that in just a moment. Post-smoking session, they again conduct a lung function test, a CO test, the blood nicotine, and then the post-session survey where we're again assessing the same things that I talked about during the pre-session survey. So withdrawal, urge to smoke, and things like that. So a little bit more about smoking topography. So this is what our topography looks like during the smoking session. So as you can see, it's measuring the volume of smoke as well as the number of puffs, the amount of time between their puffs. And this is of note, this is placed so that the participant cannot see it. There's some concern that they'll almost treat it like a video game where they'll try to get higher arches, which is of course going to affect the way that they're smoking. So we place this outside of their smoking area, and they aren't really affected by the topography measure at all because the flow sensor is placed in the hose, and so there's just 2 extra hoses essentially coming out of the hose that doesn't affect their smoking at all. This is what their results look like. They will essentially pop up the amount of time that they spent smoking, their puffing time, their puff duration, and a bunch of other measures that we are interested in as well. So as far as our current data for this study, so far we have 4 participants enrolled, 2 of which have completed, meaning that they've completed session 1 as well as session 2. So in terms of their carbon monoxide measures, we are like we would expect, no changes between flavors and unflavored shisha pre-smoking session. However, we are seeing increases. With the 2 participants that we have, the increase is with unflavored shisha above and beyond their flavored shisha choice. We're not sure why this is. It may just be these 2 participants. In terms of topography, we are interested in what we're seeing so far. So far, among in their choice flavor sessions, they are puffing longer. So you can see this is the 27 seconds puffing as versus the unflavored shisha. They're spending 10 seconds puffing throughout. I'm sorry, that's in minutes. And then the average puff duration in seconds, we're not seeing differences there. However, if we look at the inner puff interval, we are seeing longer inner puff intervals for the unflavored shisha, meaning that they are spending longer not puffing between each of their puffs versus the 10 seconds we're seeing in the unflavored or in the flavored shisha. Similar patterns that we're seeing with total puff number as well as total inhaled volume. We're seeing a greater number of puffs as well as overall longer puffs with their choice flavored shisha. I just pulled one question from our quantitative piece. We asked them the likelihood of continued hookah use if there were no flavors available in hookah, and we rate this on a 0 to 10 scale, where 0 is not at all likely to continue using, 10 is very likely to continue using, and we are seeing a mean of 2 so far, indicating that they're not very likely to continue using hookah if it did not have flavors, indicating that, again, flavors are an extremely important, play an important role in hookah use. So this study is the first to measure the impact of flavors in hookah in a laboratory setting. It also has the potential to inform regulations and legislation related to hookah and flavored tobacco, again, specifically with the Tobacco Control Act not including hookah. This research, as well as additional research, could make it so that hookah is encompassed under that legislation. And this study will provide a knowledge of the importance of flavors in hookah and the impact on initiation and maintenance of use. In terms of future directions, it would be great to do this study with a larger N if resources were available. It would also be interesting to see how use patterns change in a group or a social setting. That's one thing that is kind of special about hookah, or different about hookah, is that it's so often used in a social setting. And so it would be important to apply this research to a social setting versus in our study where they're coming in one at a time. It would also be important to look at the impact of other types of shisha. So the shisha that we are using it contains molasses, so it's a very gooey substance, versus kind of a more traditional shisha, which would be a non-molasses shisha. And just as far as reviews among users online who are purchasing the non-molasses shisha, they're saying things like, this really shouldn't be used by naive users or by people who aren't familiar with hookah because it is so harsh, it's difficult to smoke. Again, indicating that they're implying that naive users should start with a flavored shisha because it's easier to smoke. It would also be interesting to conduct this study with high and low frequency users. So high frequency users would theoretically be more heavily dependent users, and low frequency users would be non-dependent or kind of social users of hookah. And it's possible that among more heavily dependent users, because they are motivated to counteract their withdrawal symptoms, they may be less affected by the lack of flavorings in the unflavored shisha, versus low frequency users may be more motivated by the enjoyment that they get from using hookah and flavored hookah particularly, and so they may be more impacted by the lack of flavors. So then I'd like to talk a little bit about our second study examining hookah and the impact of alcohol. So again, there's not a whole lot of literature on hookah and alcohol, and so we need to draw on the cigarette literature in order to gain a little bit of background. So cigarette smokers smoke more cigarettes when drinking alcohol, and this was an in-lab study conducted. They also have a more difficult time abstaining from smoking when they're drinking alcohol. And this results in more smoke and more toxicant exposure, like I talked about earlier. It's also important to note, I think I've touched on it a little bit, but we can't just apply the cigarette literature directly to hookah for a few reasons. So first, like we talked about, there's different smoking patterns. Hookah users smoke a great deal more, and so we can't just apply cigarette literature. Also, the social nature of hookah that I talked about. Hookah is easier to inhale, and hookah is flavored. And so for these reasons, we can't just apply the cigarette literature to hookah. There's a little bit of research starting to come out on hookah and alcohol, again, mostly self-report. But individuals self-report a high co-occurrence of alcohol and hookah smoking. And it's estimated that hookah smokers are more than twice as likely to use alcohol compared to non-hookah users. And often alcohol use is happening before as well as during hookah sessions. So in a study of hookah bar patrons, 43% reported alcohol use before or during the session, and this was even higher, so this rate was 67.7% among patrons over the legal drinking age. So the purpose of this study is to examine the effect of alcohol consumption on hookah smoking behaviors and resultant tobacco-related toxicant exposure. So this is a field study in which we are going out to hookah bars that do and do not also have alcohol sales. Participants are anyone over the age of 18 who are planning to use hookah at the hookah bar. They do not have to be planning to use alcohol. We are recruiting 100 participants. Theoretically, we'll have 50 who are using alcohol and 50 who are not using alcohol, although this isn't randomized, and so we can't control this. We do have letters of support from the hookah bar owners and managers, and they are generally supportive of our research. This is the second field study that we've conducted at hookah bars. So in terms of our design, as participants walk up to us, they're recruited into our study, they provide verbal consent, and then we do a carbon monoxide, an exhaled carbon monoxide measure, as well as a breath alcohol concentration measure. And then they complete an entrance survey. So these are both the carbon monoxide and the BAC measures are objective measures. So we're collecting biomarkers in this study. And during the entrance survey, we are gaining a lot of information about their typical alcohol and hookah use, as well as other tobacco use, as well as perceptions of hookah. They are then given a wristband with their ID on it. They go into the hookah bar and we tell them to just do whatever they were planning to do. And then as they come out, they're allowed to spend as much time in the hookah bar as they would like. And then as they come out, we have our exit procedures, which include, again, the CO and BAC biomarker measures, as well as an exit survey, asking them about how much they used, what their use behaviors were in terms of hookah and alcohol. Our data for this study, this is another ongoing study. We have 19 participants so far with a mean age of 28. The majority are male, majority Caucasian, as well as they all seem to be employed full-time aside from one part-time employee. In terms of hookah use behaviors, this is their report on the exit survey. They are smoking just over 1 bowl of hookah. They are using just about 3 coals during their session and smoking with about 3 people on average. In terms of their alcohol and hookah use, we had them complete the audit, which is the alcohol use questionnaire, as well as a hookah dependence measure. In terms of alcohol use, they are scoring 6.79, where the cutoff for problematic use is 8. So it's relatively high and close to the cutoff. In terms of hookah use, they are scoring 5.4, and here the cutoff for dependence is 10. They are, so in terms of BAC measures, we are seeing that 7 participants had increasing BACs. So this indicates that they were using alcohol at the hookah bar. 4 participants had a decreasing BAC, indicating pre-alcohol use and then a decreasing BAC. So this might be that they used alcohol before and then stopped using, or they just used less than they were before, therefore causing their BAC to decrease. And then 8 participants had a BAC of 0 coming in and a BAC of 0 leaving indicating no detectable alcohol use. So I say no detectable alcohol use because if a participant has one beer and then they drink that over a 2-hour period, we likely aren't going to be able to detect any alcohol use with our measure. 14 participants, so 73%, reported alcohol use prior to visiting the hookah bar. And 29% indicated drinking while smoking hookah in order to increase their buzz. So this was a self-report measure asking what their motivation is, and 29% said that yes, they drink while they use hookah in order to increase their buzz. In terms of our changes in alcohol and carbon monoxide, you can see an overall mean increase in BAC from 0.02 essentially to 0.03. And as well as, not surprisingly, an increase in carbon monoxide levels from 6.6 up to 59.6. So a pretty high increase there. So this study will be the first study to examine the role of alcohol on hookah smoking behaviors and patterns. It'll also be the first study to examine carbon monoxide levels in the absence and the presence of alcohol use. So this is the first study to collect biomarkers of concurrent hookah and alcohol use. And this will give us information on differences in hookah dependence between drinkers and non-drinkers. In terms of future directions for this study, it would be important to conduct a laboratory study with more control. And so this is actually what I am hoping to present or to submit as an F in December. It will be a double-blind, placebo-controlled, randomized crossover trial in which participants will come in for 2 sessions. In one session, they will drink a placebo drink while they smoke hookah. In the other condition, they will in the second session or the other session, they will drink a active drink, so containing alcohol, while they smoke hookah. It will be double-blind in that the participant will be told in both conditions that they are using alcohol, and the researcher interacting with the participant will not know which condition they're in. We'll be able to control their alcohol administration, and so we'll be able to get them to exactly the BAC that we want, and it will be similar for all participants. We'll also be able to use our topography measure in order to look directly at patterns of use. So we'll be able to see, is it that they are choosing to smoke longer? Is it that they are choosing, or that they're drawing harder? Are they drawing longer? Are there shorter pauses between their pulls on the hookah? We'll be able to parse that apart and see exactly why or where their smoking patterns are changing. And it'll be important also to conduct a study in group versus non-group settings, again, because of the way in which hookah is used and the social nature of hookah. These are some references, some cited literature. And I'd like to thank the Oklahoma Tobacco Research Center for providing support throughout the summer, as well as the Wagner Lab and everyone who works in the Wagner Lab for their help in recruiting, staying out at hookah bars until 2 a.m. And I'd also like to note that funding for both projects was provided by the Department of Pediatrics and the OTRC and TSET. Thank you so much.